Hello and welcome to this video, guys. Today we are going to look into the facade design pattern. So the facade pattern is a structural design pattern which provides simplified interface to a more complex system. So in the context of Angular, the facade pattern is often used to simplify interactions between components and services. Angular services are used to encapsulate functionality and provide a way to share data between a couple of different components. Services can be used to manage data storage, retrieve data from a server, or handle user interactions. And as the application grows in complexity, interaction between services and components can become very complex and become very difficult to manage. So the facade pattern can be implemented in a new number of ways, but a common approach is to create a new service that acts as a facade for the underlying services. So if we would implement this pattern, let's go ahead and create a folder called services. In the services folder, we will generate three services. The first service we will generate is first and foremost called let's say product service. Once the product service has been generated, we're going to jump into creating a service called user service. And once the user service is now generated, we're in the end going to generate a new service called facade service. So we're going to simulate the behavior of actually having facades within our application. So now that we have three different services, we can start by actually going to the user service. Let's say we have a function called getAllUsers. In this case, we are going to just have quite simple. It's just going to return the users of. So as an observable, in this case, it will communicate with backend and fetch the data and then return it here. Now we don't have any backend, so we'll just try to mimic it by just generating a observable of some user here. Alright, so now that we have it like this, we can go ahead and create a couple of users. We can have John a couple of times here, I guess. So now that we have two users, we can copy whatever we had there, jump into the product service and go ahead and add it here. So get all products. So now we can add products, so it could be name, this could be computer, doesn't matter what else it is. So a computer, and this could be the mouse that we have for a computer. So a couple of different products, right? So with the facade pattern, or without the facade pattern, in order for us to fetch the data, say we're going to fetch it from the app component, we will have to inject two different services in this case. So in this case, we would have to inject user service, and we would have to also inject the product service. And you know, it can become very cluttered when we have multiple services that are supposed to fetch data from a view that we have. So in this case, you would have to say this dot users. You would have to fetch them with observables in this way, which would make it quite, not difficult, but rather it will add a lot of boilerplate code to the app component file in this case, which we want to try to avoid as much as possible. So with the facade design pattern, the idea is really that instead of doing it in this way, we can create a facade for the components or for the section we want it to be at, and essentially put this logic within the service, so we don't have to handle it in every TS file that we have. So in this case, we would probably call let's say get users and products. So in this case, this would just fetch all of the users and products in this way. And this is going to return an observable in this way. And yeah, so instead of having to inject this within the component, we could just call the facade service. So in this case, the facade service, and here we can say this facade service get users and products, and this is going to return an object. So let's see here, with products and users, which still does not make sense for us. So what we want to do is essentially, maybe we want to return a stream of this. So we could say fork join in this case. So instead of having to subscribe twice, we can just set up the fork join that we have in RxJS in this case. Let's go ahead and add the import it manually, I guess. it is not really liking what we are doing. So RxJS, I think you can import that from RxJS, and we can just add an array syntax so that it won't to, and we can remove this as well. So in this way, we're moving two of the subscriptions, we're combining them with fork join. So in this case, whenever we call it here, we will have one subscription. So the subscription would then return an array. So if you're used to working with React, you would have this set use state would have first a variable and the second variable, and you can destruct it with the array with the square brackets. So it's quite similar. So in this case, just check which one is the first. So user is first. So in this case, we'd say users and users products. All right. So this, let's see here. We obviously need to have some typing because, yeah, let's just go ahead and say it's of any type as for now. And this should then return the users and product. And here we can react to these changes. So this is one way of actually using the facades. If we want to go to the next level, we could instead go ahead and say we want to really call the function here instead. We don't want to have this logic at all in the component where we actually fetch the data and set it. So we can just copy this real quick, move it here, and say whenever we call this function, it will do something. Maybe we want to have behavior subjects. So let's go ahead and create a private behavior subject. So users, I usually call them user BS. Does not look really good, but here we can say new behavior subject, imported from RxJS, and here we can give it a type. We don't have any type right now, so we'll just give it a default value. We can do the same for the products. The reasons to why we have the behavior subject as private is usually because we want it, we only want to be able to change this value from within the facade and not from outside. So in order for us to actually listen to changes that comes from here, we can essentially now say that we have a users, and then we can do the same for the products. We will call the as observable from the behavior subject, and this can then be retrieved from the components and subscribe to the changes that we have here. So this means we can have and I usually put the $sign afterwards, so that indicates it's an observable. And now we have this logic here. So either you could go with behavior subjects. So if you set up a listener for this, in the different components that you have, you will be able to listen for changes. If you don't want that and you only want this for a single purpose, which might be to only be able to listen for the facade service, in a single component, you might want to say set up the users like this, and we'll just give it a type any for now, and then you can subscribe to it and set it here. And also you could also add, if you want to do pipe take one, so that it completes the subscription after calling the data. So in this case, you could do the same for product. So now we are essentially having the product. So when we inject the service, or when we use the service from the app component, we will be able to say this facade service dot products, and we'll be able to say this facade service dot users. And now we could set up a getter here if you want to have it in this way, and we can just return the products and the users in this way if you wanted to have it. So once this is changed in the service, so given we call this get users and products, it will call it and it will set these variables. We could also set it with the behavior subjects that we have. So we need to call next on the behavior subject. The same thing goes for the product behavior subject. So next products. And just to give you a brief, if you want to be able to listen or react to the data from multiple components, you obviously need to use behavior subjects, right? If not, you can use this user. So if you have a single purpose where you only want to use it from a single component, and it's from this component that you actually call the function, then it might be okay to do it in this way. I prefer to have behavior subjects because in the future you will still have to, most likely you want to have the data in multiple components, and then the behavior subjects, if you have implemented them, you can use them. You could also do another way, which essentially would be to, so you could subscribe to it, to the other alternatives that you want. So here's a common use case of using facades to simplify the way the components look like and work. So if we now decide that we want to instead go with the observables that we have, we could instead set two new variables that we have. So we could have products $sign equals to, which is going to be an observable, so observable of type any as for now. Usually you should have types, obviously, for type security, and you could do it in this way. So we can just keep the getters for now, and here we would essentially say on the constructor, we would say, obviously also before here, so we would say this product equals to this Facade service product, and the same thing we would have to do that for the users. So when we trigger this fetch, it's going to call the next on the behavior subject, which essentially will trigger a new change here. So if you wanted this to reflect in the HTML, we could have just written products async, and here we can just print it as JSON. We could do the same thing for the users. This will then return it in the HTML, as we can see to the right. So let's add the pre-value so that we have a pretty nice print of the data that we have. And here we can see the computer, the mouse, John, and John, right? So it's quite similar to the way that we could do it with the regular, the other way around, so with the products and the users. So here we do not need to subscribe to anything really, we just need to print the value. So products and user, and as you can see here, it's printing it again. All right, so there's two different ways to do it. I would recommend the behavior subjects because in the future, if you want to add the data to other components, it would be quite easy to do so. So let's jump into the pros and cons of using Facade. So it simplifies the code in the component file. It becomes much cleaner. It increases the maintainability for the components. It also encourages a bit of decoupling. So we have some logic in the service, which then handles the communication with other services and so on. It provides a clear interface, so we know for a fact what we want to do. However, there are a couple of cons as well with Facade design pattern. It might introduce unnecessary complexity. So yeah, here we need to know that we need to define the observables in this way, and then we need to call a function to actually fetch the data. So in this case, it introduces an additional layer of indirection. So yeah, there's more code you need to add. It will be more in terms of maintenance. So you will have to add unit tests for this file and the next file. So this Facade service. So there are many pros and cons. It's a nice design pattern if you want to decrease the amount of code you write in the app components, which I think is a good pattern to strive for. So, thank you for watching, guys. All of the best. Bye.